ॐ विश्वन्दर्पण दृश्यमाननगरी तुल्यन्निजान्तर्गतं पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिर्वोद्भूतं यथा निद्रया यः साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोधसमये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयम् तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये। नारायणं पद्मभुवं वसिष्ठं शक्तिं च तत्पुत्रपराशरं च व्यासं शुकं गौडपदं महान्तं गोविन्दयोगीन्द्रमथास्य शिष्यं श्रीशङ्कराचार्यमथास्य पद्मपादं च हस्तामलकं च शिष्यं तन्तोटकं वातिककारमन्यान् अस्मद्गुरून् सन्ततमानतोऽस्मि। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। परब्रह्मनिष्ठं स्वतो धर्मनिष्ठम् अहिंसैकनिष्ठं स्वशिष्यै सुजुष्टं यतीनां वरिष्ठं गुरूणां गरिष्ठं दयानन्दरूपं मदाचार्यमीडे। नमः श्री परमार्थाय संसाराध्यासनाशिने श्रोत्रियब्रह्मनिष्ठाय तस्मै ब्रह्मविदे नमः। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ॐ I welcome you all to the 30th class of the Fundamentals of Vedanta series. So the last class we concluded a major topic of how an adhikari becomes an adhikari. And we said that an adhikari becomes an adhikari by gaining sadhana chatushtaya sampattihi, vivekaha, vairagyam, shamadhi shatka sampattihi, and mumukshutvam. And how does he gain these qualifications? We said through karma yoga and upasana yoga. Then there arises a question about what is the role of bhakti in this? Where does bhakti fit in? And since this is a somewhat extensive topic, I thought we will skip summarizing the entire development that we have been doing in most of our classes. So we'll get into the topic of bhakti and see how it fits into the picture. So this can be a somewhat confusing topic because how it fits in, until that is clear, it will appear very confusing. And it has got different shades of meanings also. So that is what we plan to cover today. The word bhakti has got two meanings. One is devotion to Ishvara. Devotion means love. So you can say that bhakti is love towards Ishvara. That's the first meaning. We'll look into it in more detail. The second meaning is bhakti as a discipline for gaining liberation, moksha. Then in this context, bhakti becomes a sadhana. And therefore, generally the word yoga is appended to it and it's called Bhakti-Yoga. So these are the two high-level meanings, and now we look at each of them. So when we talk about bhakti being devotion to Ishvara, then the question arises, what is devotion? And as we said, devotion is love. So you have to understand what love is. So when do I say that I love something? So we say that when something evokes a pleased self, when something makes me happy, when something evokes happiness in me, then I say I love that object, person, or situation. So then what does such a person who loves something want to do? The person thinks about that thing because thinking itself makes him happy, wants to know more about whatever it is, wants to talk about it, and wants to experience that also. And if he doesn't have whatever it is, he wants to acquire it, have a union with it. And if the person already has that thing, the object of love, then he wants to retain it. He does everything to retain it. So when something evokes the pleased self, the happy me, then I say that I love that thing. Maybe a person, object, or situation. So now consider a materialist. A materialist loves materials. What does he do? He thinks about it. He wants to know more about it. And then he talks about it. He wants to experience it. He wants to acquire it. And if he has it, he wants to retain it. His life is centered around materials. So in a manner of speaking, he can be called a materials bhakta. Now consider another person, maybe a he or a she, has a fiance. And then this person wants to think about the fiance, wants to talk about the fiance, wants to, constantly perhaps chatting with this person, and wants to formalize that relationship. And if the relationship is already formalized, then wants to maintain that relationship. So this person can be called a fiance bhakta. Because that is what is dominating his mind and activities. But bhakti is generally used in the sense of devotion, love directed towards some higher principle. For example, we can talk about Desha Bhakti. When one is a patriot, loves the country, does everything for the country, thinks about the good of the country, wants to uplift the country. So such a person is a Desha Bhakta. Or there can be somebody like Shravana Kumar. He was a Matru Bhakta, Pitru Bhakta. His devotion was directed towards his parents. And similarly, one can also have Ishvara Bhakti, where the devotion is directed towards Ishvara. So we are talking about love in general, because it's first important to understand love in general before we come to the love of Ishvara. So continuing with this line of thought about love in general, the Shastras divide love into three categories. The Shastras, we said, are very good at enumerating things, categorizing things. So love is also categorized into three categories. So then it becomes easier to understand it. So first is love of goals. So something is a goal for me. I want to acquire it. So why do I say I love that? The very fact that it's a goal means I love that. Otherwise, why would it be a goal for me? So this may be a materialistic goal, like wealth or name, fame, possessions, whatever. It could be anything or even a spiritual goal. So there is love of goals. The second one is love of means. Means meaning those things through which I achieve my goals. Why do I love the means? Because it is through the means that I can achieve my goals. My love is for the goal, but I love the means also because it's only through the means that I can accomplish my goals. So I love the means also. And the third one is, who are these goals meant for? If we ask that question, we would say they're meant for me, myself. So I naturally love myself also. There is love of the self. This is the third kind of love. So all the kinds of love we have, they can be categorized into these three categories. Love of goals. And when we say goals, it may be a person, object, situation, whatever. Love of means, and then love of the self. Now, what the Shastras point out is that there is a gradation in these three kinds of love. There is a gradation in intensity of the love. The intensity of the love for means is less than the intensity of the love for the goal. This is number one. And then intensity of the love for goals is less than the intensity of love for the self. So let us look into why this is the case. So intensity for love of means or love for means is less than intensity of love for goals. Why is it the case? Because as long as the means are capable of achieving the goal, then the means are useful to me. And therefore, I love the means. But if a means becomes ineffective at producing the goal for some reason, then I'm willing to drop the means. But the goal is still in my mind. Secondly, if the goal is achieved, once the goal is achieved, my attitude towards the means also changes. It is no longer a priority. I'm again willing to forget the means also. So let's take the example of an officer somewhere. An officer who has some level of power and decision making. Maybe an officer, like an IAS officer in the government or some officer in a company, etc. So now this person becomes a means to the goal for many other people. For example, there may be people who want to get some contract or something like that. And this person's decision making is going to influence who gets the contract. So then this person, when he's there, he gets inquiries, pleasant inquiries, He might get some gifts on festivals. So he is, you can say, he is loved by these people. Why? Because he is a means to their goal. But now let us say that this person retires from service, and then he vacates his bungalow or whatever, and then he moves somewhere else. Then the next person who occupies the position becomes the means for these people. This person, they don't even know where he is now. So from this, it is clear when a means becomes ineffective, then one is willing to drop the means. The new person who comes in becomes the object of love. Now there is a second kind. We said when the goal is accomplished, also the means is sometimes forgotten or oftentimes forgotten. So there are situations where, for example, there are rich people who have a lot of property and wealth, etc. And the children take care of them. But a lot of times, the idea behind the minds of the children is that they are doing this for the sake of inheritance. There are several situations where this person, they give away everything to the children or wherever, and then they are not treated as well by the children. And then these people advise other people that don't do this. Because if you do that, then the children abandon you. So again, when the goal for these children, which was an inheritance, once it was accomplished, their attitude towards the means changed. This person was just the means. That is why even Shankaracharya says in Bhaja Govinda, Yavat vitto parjana saktaha tavat nija parivaro raktaha पश्चात जीवति जर्जर देहे वार्ताम कोपि न पृच्छति गेहे. So as long as this person is earning, and the family members have a good attitude towards him. But once he is in this old and fragile body, he is not able to do anything. Then they view him as a burden, perhaps. And people don't even talk to him much. Vartam kopi na pritchati gehe. Again, such people were just the means. But there is definitely love of the means is there, as long as it is a means. So you can say means is dear, but the goal is dearer. So the intensity of the love for the means is less than the intensity of the love for the goal. This is the first thing. Now let us come to the second part of this, where we say that intensity of the love for the goal is less than intensity of love for the self. And let's examine why this is the case. As we said, for whose sake are the goals? The goals are for my sake. Why do I love the goal? Because it evokes the pleased self. That is why we started with that. What I am really interested in is the pleased self. So sometimes a goal may start to evoke the displeased self. And then I'm willing to drop the goal also. For example, let us say a person is in the market for a car and he's looking around for a car. And then he sees this car and he starts to like it. It evokes the pleased self. And then he also says a very good value for money, etc. He takes all that into account. It evokes the pleased self. So he goes ahead and he acquires it. And then he experiences it. And around 7, 8, 9, 10 years later, it's an anitya vastu. It starts to develop problems. And then he has to spend money on it, repairing it. When he sees so much money going into the car, it begins to evoke the displeased self. And then what happens? He drops the car. I take the example of a person who gets married. The spouse evokes the pleased self. Then a few years down, this person discovers something that begins to evoke the displeased self. And what happens? It drops. That's how divorces happen. So, if an object evokes the displeased self, then I drop it, even if it was formerly evoking the pleased self. And therefore, love of the self is of a higher intensity than the love of goals also. So, this is what the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says. And that is the first extract that I had sent in the PDF today. So, you will read it and look at what it says. Here, I will just read it first. Sahovacha Nava are patyuh kamaya patif priyo bhavati atmanastu kamaya patif priyo bhavati nava are jaya kamaya jaya priya bhavati atmanastu kamaya jaya priya bhavati nava are putranam kamaya putraha priya bhavanti आत्मनस्तु कामाय पुत्राः प्रिया भवन्ति न वा अरे सर्वस्य कामाय सर्वं प्रियं भवति आत्मनस्तु कामाय सर्वं प्रियं भवति. So this is an extract from the Upanishad, and actually it is longer. I have picked up a portion of it only to highlight what it is saying. And this is a conversation between Yajnavalkya Rishi and Maitreyi, who is his wife. So Yajnavalkya Rishi was a grihastha, a great Rishi, a great Jnani also. And there came a point where he wanted to take up sannyasa. And so he called his wife. He had two wives. So he called them and told them that I want to now take up sannyasa and I'm giving up. I'm distributing whatever I have amongst the two of you and I'm leaving. So Maitreyi begins to question him that for what are you leaving all this? And Yajnavalkya explains to him, explains to her that it is for, he's taking this up for the sake of Jnana Nishtha, basically abidance in Atma Jnanam, for that Purnatva, for immortality. Then Maitreyi begins to ask, will I get immortality through all this? If not, then what is it that you are seeking? I am also interested in that. So Yajnavalkya is very pleased with Maitreyi. Then he begins to teach her. And this happens in the context of that dialogue. Here Yajnavalkya is explaining, Nava are patyuh kamaya patih priyo bhavati. Atmanastu kamaya patih priyo bhavati. Patih priyo bhavati. So he tells Maitreyi that for a wife, the husband is not dear for the sake of the husband. The husband is dear for her own sake. Atmanastu atmanah tu kamaya patihi priyo bhavati. The husband is dear for her own sake. Why is it so? Because the husband evokes the pleased self. The husband makes her happy. And that's why she loves the husband. And the next sentence says, Nava are jaya yai kamaya jaya priya bhavati. Atmanastu kamaya jaya priya bhavati. So from the husband's point of view, the wife is loved not for the sake of the wife. The wife is loved because for the husband's sake, because she evokes the pleased self. She makes the husband happy. Navare putranam kamaya putraha priya bhavanti. Atmanastu kamaya putraha priya bhavanti. The children are loved not for the sake of the children, but for one's own sake, because they evoke the pleased self. They make the parents happy. And then Yajnavalkya continues, he gives a lot more examples. And if we do all that, then we will take up a lot of time. So I have shortened this section. And finally, Yajnavalkya says, Navare sarvasya kamaya sarvam priyam bhavati. Atmanastu kamaya sarvam priyam bhavati. Anything that you love, it is not for the sake of that person, object, or situation. It is because it evokes the pleased self. It is for your own sake. It is because the self is dear to you. So, love of means is the least intense. Love of goals is of a higher intensity than the love of means. But love of the self is of the highest intensity. This is what the Upanishad is teaching. So now we can view it in a slightly different way also. Because we talk about conditional love and unconditional love. This is a phrase that is very often used. So love of means is conditional. Why is love of means conditional love? Because as long as the means is capable of leading me to the goal or sustaining the goal, I love the means. So there is a because attached with it. Therefore, it becomes conditional. Now, when it comes to the love of goals also, love of goals is also conditional because it has to evoke the pleased self. As long as it evokes the pleased self, that love lasts. Therefore, love of goals is also conditional. But what about the love of the self? Is there a because attached with it? There is no because. The love of the self is there. For every being, the love of the self is there and is always there. It is never compromised under any situation. Therefore, the love of the self is unconditional. So here one may ask a question that there are several people we know who reach out to people who are suffering, and they 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 do something for them. They try to ease their suffering. So is that not unconditional love? We say on the surface it appears like that. But if you look into it, what is really going on is that this person who reaches out, helps other people who are suffering, that person has a very sensitive mind. And that mind begins to pick up the sadness, the suffering of the other person. So that mind tends to resonate in their suffering. And therefore, he cannot stand that situation because his mind is is suffering along with that person. And therefore he acts because it eases his own suffering, his own sadness, his own burden in the process. Again, this person is also acting for his own sake because he loves the pleased self. He wants to remove this displeased self. So then there can be another question. That we have talked about a jnani. Is a jnani's love towards the world? The jnani also loves the world. He does good for the world. So isn't the jnani's love unconditional? So we say yes. In case of a jnani, that love is unconditional. But then you said that only love of the self is unconditional, but he is doing things for the good of the world, and now you're saying that that is unconditional. How is that possible? Are you not contradicting yourself? What we say is, in case of the jnani, he sees that there is only the self. The world is not separate from the self. Therefore, his love is unconditional because it is love of the self only. Therefore, love of the self is the only unconditional love. Love of anything else is conditional. This is what the Upanishad is telling us. So for everyone, the Atma, the self alone is the dearest entity. There can be dear things, the means. There can be dearer things, the goals. But Atma alone is the dearest thing. This is the assertion. So this background is very important to understand love of God. So now we come to the topic of love of God having this background. We say love of God also depends on how one looks upon God. There's three ways one can look upon God. God can be a means, number one. God can be a goal, number two. Or, as in case of a jnani, God becomes one with the self. One has union with Ishvara. That means God becomes one with the self. So in that case, God is looked upon as the self only. This is the third kind. So let us analyze this. And here, that next shloka, that in the handout, we will look at the next shloka from the Bhagavad Gita. As Krishna talks about the gradation of the love of God here. I'll read that first and then we will look into that shloka. So this is the 16th shloka of the 7th chapter of the Gita. Chaturvidha bhajante mam jana sukritin Arto jignasurartharthi jnani cha bharatarshava. So Krishna is saying that there are four kinds of bhaktas. There are four kinds of people who love me, who are devoted to me. Chaturvidha janaha mam bhajante. Chaturvidha janaha mam bhajante. Four kinds of people worship me, are devoted to me. And Krishna gives an adjective for these people. He says they are all sukritinaha. Sukritinaha means they are all punyaman. They have done some punyam in the past. There's no doubt about it, because that is why they have got some devotion. Hey Arjuna, there are four kinds of people. And who are they? Krishna enumerates them in the next line. The artaha, the number one. And then Jigyasu, who comes first, we will alter the order and say Artha and then Artharthi, number two. And third is Jignyasuhu, number three. And the fourth is Jnani, number four. So let us look into who these four kinds of bhaktas are. First is Artaha Bhaktaha. So an artaha is a person who thinks of Ishvara. An artaha is a person who is in trouble, basically. That's what literally artaha means. He has arti. Artihi means trouble. Some problem, some crisis. So a person who has artihi is called artaha, a person in trouble. So very often we find people in trouble think of Ishvara. Normally they don't. But once there is some crisis, suddenly this person begins to invoke Ishvara. So this person requires a problem to become a devotee. For example, there may be a sudden sickness, sudden stomachache, for example, out of nowhere. And he starts to say, Hey Bhagwan, Hey Bhagwan. Or this person is walking in a forest and Bhagavad Shankaracharya usually gives this example of a person sighting a tiger. The crisis, he runs away, shouting the name of Bhagavan. Why is he doing this? Why has he suddenly discovered this devotion for Bhagavan? Because he is in dukkha, there is pain, there is crisis. So he is doing it for dukkha nivrityartham, for removing the sorrow somehow. You say, in fact, that is how bhakti starts for a lot of us. For everybody, invariably, the start of bhakti is through some such thing. For example, when there are children, they have to write some exam, and it's a difficult exam. So there is a difficulty, and there is some. If he has not prepared well, then there will be more intense prayers. He visits the temple and does pradakshina and all that. So this kind of bhakti is artaha bhakti. Now, let us look at the next kind of bhakta, artharthi. Because we can sort of group artaha and artharthi together. We will see that. So now, who is an artharthi bhaktaha? He is not somebody who is immediately in some trouble or anything, but he is desiring something. So arthi means a desirer, like vidyarthi. Vidyarthi is a desirer, of a seeker of vidya. Who is an artharthi? You looked at artha purushartha. He is desiring artha. Means wealth, name, fame, power, position, vehicle, house, whatever. And we can include kamaha also here. He is desirous of materials basically. So such a person treats Ishvara as an accomplice in the material pursuits. So he plays to Ishvara for sukha praptyartham, for the sake of the sukha through artha or kama. So now if we look at both of these bhaktas, artha bhaktaha and artharthi bhaktaha, they are not really interested in Ishvara per se, in God per se. But they want to use God for some specific purpose, dukkha nivrityartham or sukha praptyartham. So for them, God is a means, not the goal. The means is something, the goal is something else. God becomes a means. And therefore we say the love of the God, in their case, is the least intense amongst the bhaktas. Because they are sort of using God. And once the means is accomplished, then they forget God. Or if sometimes the means is not accomplished, then they may even scold God and drop their bhakti. Or they may just continue some shallow form of bhakti because they are afraid of God. So now, for example, if somebody says, I love you if you give me the money. That statement. So what does it imply? I don't love you if you don't give me the money. So what does it mean? This person really loves the money, not you. So such is the case with the Artaha and the Artharti Bhaktaha. So their bhakti is called Manda Bhakti, the bhakti of a religious materialist. Basically, they are religious materialists. So this is the first category. So now let's come to the third kind of bhaktaha, the Jigyasu Bhaktaha. So we discussed Jigyasu extensively during this series, the Mumukshuhu becomes a Jigyasu, etc. So the Jigyasu is much more mature than the Artha Bhakta or the Artharti Bhakta. He has seen the limitations of the worldly things. He knows they are anitya, and therefore he knows they cannot give me this peace, security, and happiness. And then the Nitya Vastu alone can give me this peace, security, and happiness. And he knows that God is the Nitya Vastu. Therefore, he begins to seek Ishvara. He also knows some other things about Ishvara because he is a Jigyasuhu. He knows that Ishvara is all pervading. He knows that he is a Nimitta Karana as well as the Upadana Karana. We have discussed this. Therefore, Ishvara has become the world, etc. Therefore, Ishvara is all pervading. And if Ishvara is all pervading, Ishvara is here and now. Right? Here and now, Ishvara is there. But if I don't see him, if something is here and now, and if I don't see it, that only causes ignorance. Therefore, he becomes a seeker of knowledge in order to remove this ignorance. We have said the ignorance is Atma Ajnanam. He becomes a seeker of knowledge in order to remove the Atma Ajnanam. Because in the absence of Ajnanam, there is Adhyasa, superimposition. And when the superimposition is there, you don't see what really is there. If the rope is there in front of me, if the rope is here and now, but I'm not seeing the rope, I'm seeing the snake. That means there is ignorance. Ishvara is here and now. If I am not able to see Ishvara, that means there is Ishvara. Ajnanam is there. There is Atma Ajnanam. And therefore, this person becomes a seeker of knowledge because he knows Ishvara Prapti. He is only through Jnana Prapti. And for the sake of the Jnanam, he knows purification of mind is important. And therefore, he works for the purification of mind also. He becomes a karma yogi. And therefore, a person who is a karma yogi, he is also a jigyasu bhakta. If he has all this clarity that he is engaging in karma yoga for the sake of purification of mind, for the sake of jnana. And then there may be a person who has gained chitta shuddhi and is now pursuing jnanam. So even such a person is a jigyasu. So his bhakti is not sakama bhakti, he becomes nishkama bhakti, he is not for the sake of artha and kama. So for him, God is the goal. Ishvara is the goal. Hence, his love for Ishvara is more intense as compared to the bhakta who is viewing God as purely a means. This form of bhakti is rarer. But his love is also conditional. Because he wants to get this peace, security, happiness, purnatvam from the attainment of Ishvara. What he is aiming for is really the purnatvam. And therefore his bhakti is also conditional only. But it is more intense, much more intense than the bhakti of the Artha Bhakta or the Artharti Bhakta. Now we come to the fourth bhakta that Krishna talks about here. Artha, Artharthi, Jigyasuhu, and Jnani. So for a Jnani, God is not a means to attain something. Why? Because he has already attained what he wanted to attain. God is not a goal also. Why? The answer is the same. You have a goal if you want to attain that goal. But God, Jnani has already attained Ishvara. Therefore, God is not a goal also for a Jnani. He is not a Jigyasu. A Jnani is not a Jigyasu. So, how has he attained God? He has attained God through the knowledge that God is not other than me. God was always one with me. I just did not know that. So there never was any real separation. And by knowing this, he has attained God. So in his case, God is identical with the self. When we say the self, we are not talking about the body and the mind. We will discuss this later. So his form of love is the most intense. Why? Because, as we have said, the self-love alone is the unconditional love. And in his case, self has become one with God. Therefore, his love of God as the self is unconditional love. In the case of Artha Artharthi Bhakta, it was conditional love. So God was a means to attain something else. Because was there, the because. He loved God because he wanted to attain something. In case of the Jigyasu, God was the goal. But again, because is there, because he wants to attain the Purnatvam, he has still not attained the goal. In case of the Jnani, the goal is already attained. His oneness with Ishvara has already attained. Therefore, this Purnatvam is already attained. There is nothing more to attain. So what because can be there for a Jnani? There is no because. He loves the self because the self is glorious. Being one with God, God is glorious, the self is glorious, therefore he loves the self. There is no condition attached to it. Because he has attained God also. So if God is other than me, something other than me, then I become limited. And therefore God is loved because through God I get something. Either it may be materials, some material goals, or it may even be spiritual goals. Through that God I get something, through that God who is other than me. And therefore if there's a God other than me, that God's love becomes conditional love only. Therefore, the only way God's love becomes unconditional is that God and I should become one. When there is no separation, then one becomes Purna. Being one with God, one is totally fulfilled. Then there is nothing more to attain. Then this love becomes unconditional love. I have nothing to seek from God. I don't have to seek God. I have nothing to seek from God also. Usually the Dvaita bhaktas, who who always view God as being something separate, they criticize the Advaita Bhakta as saying that he doesn't have the real love of God. Because he is only talking about this jnanam most of the time. Then that's a misunderstanding. What Vedanta says, what Krishna is saying here is that this Advaita Bhaktas, this Jnanis, love is the most intense form of love. It is unconditional. So this is Uttama Bhakti, unconditional love of God. Therefore, love of Artha Artharthi Bhakta is Manda Bhakti. Love of Jignasu Bhakta is the Madhyama Bhakti. Love of a Jnani, the Jnani's love of Ishvara is the most intense and it's unconditional. Therefore, it's Uttama Bhakti. So Krishna continues in the next shloka, continues the same theme. So we will read that next. He says, Tesham jnani nitya yuktaha eka bhaktir vishishyate priyo hi jnani notyartham aham sacha mama priyaha. So Krishna elaborates here why the jnani's bhakti is distinguished. Says Tesham jnani nitya yuktaha eka bhakti vishishyate. So Tesham means amongst those, amongst whom, amongst the Chaturvidhanam Bhaktanam, Tesham Chaturvidhanam Bhaktanam Madhye. Amongst those four bhaktas that I talked about, Krishna is saying, Tesham Jnani Vishishyate. The Jnani is distinguished, he says. Why? Because he gives the reason Nitya Yuktaha. Because the Jnani is Nitya Yuktaha. Nitya Yuktaha means always connected, always in union. So for the Ajnani, for the other bhaktas that are Ajnanis, meaning Artaha, Artharthi, and includes Jignasuhu also, because he is desirous of Jnanam, he has not yet gained Jnanam, he is also an Ajnani at this point. He will become a Jnani, but Jignasuhu is also an Ajnani. So from the point of view of all the three, Ishvara is still somebody who is separate. So not united as yet. Not completely united. You can say there is some form of union in case of the Artha Bhakti. When there is trouble, he thinks of Ishvara. For the Artharthi Bhakti, when he desires something, he thinks of Ishvara. That you can say is some kind of a union, but it is still union with a separate Ishvara. The Jigyasuhu Bhakti desires this Purnatvam through an Ishvara. He still has not discovered the union. So there is this separation. But for this Jnani, he has discovered that Ishvara is one with me. And is there any time when the self is absent? There is no time when I say I am not there. As long as the self is there, he knows that the self is one with Ishvara. And therefore, he is Nitya Yuktaha because he has discovered this union with Ishvara and he knows he is inseparable from Ishvara as he is inseparable from himself. So imagine two people who are embracing because they love each other. Now imagine that this embrace is so tight that the difference between the two disappears. They become one. So such is the embrace of the Jnani. The embrace is so tight that now there is no question of separation. This is absolutely unconditional love. So the separation is complete. And we say such a complete separation is only possible under one condition, that there was no real separation to begin with. That the separation was out of ignorance. The idea of separation was out of ignorance, and that idea of separation now goes away forever through this knowledge that there was never any separation to begin with. So this is true of everybody Because Ishvara is all pervading. Ishvara pervades me also. Ishvara pervades every being. So there is no separation for any being ever. But out of ignorance, one thinks there is separation. All the Jnani has discovered is that there never really was any separation at all. He is Nitya Yukta. And he is called Eka Bhakti. Yeah, the Jnani is called Eka Bhakti. Means for one whose devotion has resolved in this oneness. The devotion has culminated in this oneness with Ishvara, in this union with Ishvara. He knows that there never really was any second entity to unite with. Eka Bhakti. His love is the unconditional love. And this is the highest Bhakti called Advaita Bhakti or Para Bhakti. And then Krishna elaborates this further in the second line. He says, Priyo hi jnaninaha atyartham aham. Atyartham aham. So he says, Atyartham aham jnaninah priyaha. For the jnani, I am extremely dear, absolutely dear, he says, Atyartham aham priyaha. Jnaninaha. For the jnani, I am absolutely dear, meaning I am unconditionally dear. This is only possible in case of a jnani. Why? Because I am the jnani's self. The love of the self is unconditional. So love of Ishvara becomes unconditional. Ishvara is as dear to the jnani as his own self. And then Krishna says next that Sacha mama atyartham priyaha. The word atyartham can be used in both cases. Atyartham means absolutely, totally, completely. And he said, Sacha mama atyartham priyaha. Even the jnani is extremely dear to me. Why? Because he is me. He is my own self. There is no separation between ourselves. Ishvara's self and the jnani's self are really one. So this jnani is also extremely dear to me. He says, Krishna says, in fact, in the next shloka that we have not picked up, Krishna says the jnani is me. There is no difference, says Krishna. So this is the first meaning of bhakti, devotion to Ishvara. And this, as we said, is of three kinds. The manda bhakti of the artha artharthi bhaktaha. And then the madhyama bhakti of the jigyasuhu. And the uttama bhakti of the jnani. This is love of Ishvara, devotion to Ishvara. So now we come to the next topic, which is bhakti as a sadhana to attain moksha. He said in this case, the word yoga is generally appended, becomes bhakti yoga. So now there arises a question naturally that we talked about. We talked about moksha extensively. And there we said that moksha is eka sadhana sadhyam. Moksha is only attained through jnana. And then we talked about karma yoga and upasana yoga as being sadhanas for gaining chitta shuddhi, which is the precursor to jnana. So we talked about jnana yoga, we talked about karma yoga, we talked about upasana yoga. Now suddenly you are talking about bhakti yoga. So is this a separate, discipline for gaining moksha. So what is this Bhakti Yoga that we are talking about now? So we say that Bhakti is not a separate discipline at all. This Bhakti Yoga is not a separate discipline at all. It is a name given to a combination of disciplines that collectively lead to moksha. So Bhakti Yoga is all of these called collectively taken together as Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Upasana Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. We can say that the first stage of Bhakti Yoga is Karma Yoga. We can say the second stage of Bhakti Yoga is Upasana Yoga. And the third stage of Bhakti Yoga is Jnana Yoga. So why do we say that Bhakti, that all of these are just stages of Bhakti? Stages of Bhakti Yoga. Because Bhakti is a common environment that pervades all of these disciplines. Can there be Karma Yoga without Bhakti? We said that there can be no Karma Yoga without Ishvara. What is Karma Yoga? We said Karma Yoga is proper action and proper attitude. What is proper attitude? It is Ishvararpana Buddhi and Prasada Buddhi. In Ishvararpana Buddhi, I do whatever is required, irrespective of my raga dvesha. I do what is required and in keeping with dharma and offering as an offering to Ishvara, who will manifest as the form of dharma. So the awareness of Ishvara has to be there. And then there is prasada buddhi. When I am experiencing everything, I take everything as a prasada from Ishvara. So awareness of Ishvara has to be there. So there is a surrender of my ragas and dveshas at the feet of Ishvara, both in Ishvararpana Buddhi, I do what is right, irrespective of what my raga dveshas say, and then during prasada, when I accept something at prasada, I accept it wholeheartedly with gratitude, irrespective of what my ragas dveshas say. So there is a surrender of my ragas and dveshas to Ishvara. This is what is surrender. Surrender of the ego to Ishvara is this. Surrender of ragas and dveshas to Ishvara. So Karma Yoga is impossible without Bhakti. In fact, Karma Yoga is the first stage of Bhakti. Then there can be no Upasana Yoga without Bhakti, because he said Upasana is dwelling on Ishvara, meditating on Ishvara. So there has to be Ishvara's presence has to be there for that in my mind. So all of this Manasa Puja, Parayanam, Manasa Japa, Manasa Parayanam, all of that is what? Meditating on Ishvara, dwelling on the glories of Ishvara, chanting the name of Ishvara, doing mantra japa with regards to some mantra of Ishvara, doing namaskara to Ishvara. There is no upasana without bhakti. When we come to the third stage, once one has gained the chitta shuddhi through these processes, and when one comes to Jnana Yoga, then what are we pursuing? This Purnatvam. As a Jigyasu, we are pursuing this Purnatvam by discovering the union with Ishvara. In fact, the Mahavakya is Tat Tvam Asi. You are that. This is talking about this identity with Ishvara. This Tvam-pada is referring to the Jivatma. The Tat-pada is referring to the Paramatma. And one has to discover this Jivatma, Paramatma, Aikyam. This is the subject matter of Vedanta as we talk. So in this, one has to understand Ishvara. Who is Ishvara really? One is dwelling upon Ishvara, one is thinking about Ishvara, one wants to know Ishvara, one wants to attain Ishvara. So this is love of Ishvara. This is bhakti is there, even in Jnana Yoga. So we say that bhakti is not a separate, bhakti yoga is not some separate discipline. So bhakti yoga, first stage is karma yoga, second stage is upasana yoga, third stage is jnana yoga. There is only bhakti yoga real. So with this, we conclude that the discussion on the meaning of bhakti in the form of devotion to Ishvara, and the second meaning of bhakti, which is a sadhana or discipline in order to attain moksha. And there's still yet another topic here, which is basically when the topic of devotion to Ishvara comes up, there's always a question. When there's a topic of love, the question of to whom is this love directed? And as one's understanding of to whom this love is directed, one's relationship also changes. How one relates to also changes. In fact, one can really not have love towards an unknown object. One should always know something about the object before one can talk about love for that object. So, we can take an example. Let's say that there was a person who used to visit the family since I was a child. And then I've always known this person, and I've always had some respect for this person, some love for this person. And then one becomes an adult. Till then, some fact about this person was unknown. Perhaps this person did something very important for the family. Suddenly, one comes to know this fact. And then one's respect, gratitude, love for this person undergoes a transformation. So we say that a similar thing happens with Ishvara also. We have all heard about Ishvara, talked about Ishvara since we were a child. But as one gets to know more about Ishvara, one's understanding undergoes a transformation, and then one's attitude also changes completely. So there are three levels of understanding Ishvara. The first level, we say Ishvara is the creator of the world. So we say Ishvara in this case is known as Jagat Karana, the creator of the world. So when one views Ishvara as the creator of the world, then one thinks about, things like pots, as we discussed, or furniture. The creator is always separate from the created thing. So we tend to visualize that this world is there and Ishvara is sitting somewhere. Just as the potter is not wherever the pot is. The potter is sitting somewhere else. Similarly, the Ishvara is sitting somewhere else. We conveniently place Ishvara in some heaven somewhere. So this kind of an Ishvara becomes somebody who is remote. Paroksha, we say. Paroksha means remote. And then we imagine what this Ishvara must be. And therefore, the most intelligent creature we see around us is a human being. So you imagine that this Ishvara must be in some human form. And because the Ishvara has got a lot of knowledge, we give the Ishvara perhaps more heads. And since Ishvara is very powerful, we can perhaps give Ishvara more hands, etc., to indicate this omniscience and omnipotence of Ishvara. And then one wonders how one will have darshan of the Ishvara, etc. So this is the level of understanding when Ishvara is Jagat Karta. Then the second level of understanding is there. So we say this Ishvara understanding as Jagat Karta is incomplete. It will always have us be associated with a lot of confusions because it's an incomplete understanding of Ishvara. We say we should always ask the question, where did the material come from? Yathornanabhi srijate grinnate cha. We saw this. So when the world is not there, space is not there, time is not there, we still say Ishvara is there. We have to ask the question, where did Ishvara get the material from? And we say Ishvara becomes the world. Ishvara himself is the material. At this level of understanding, we say Ishvara Jagat Karanam. Ishvara is both the maker and the material, both the Nimitta Karanam and the Upadana Karanam, and therefore Ishvara pervades the world. In fact, the world is manifest Ishvara. Just as wherever the ornament is gold is, similarly, wherever I see anything of the world, Ishvara is right there. This is the second level of understanding of Ishvara, where Ishvara is there in front of me as this Vishwarupa Ishvara, this world. This is Pratyaksha Ishvara, no longer Paroksha, no longer remote. Ishvara is in front of me as this world. And then there is no question of having Ishvara darshan in this case, because if one sees Ishvara as Vishwarupa, Ishvara is there in front of me. And this Ishvara is not Ekarupa. See, in the earlier case, Ishvara was Ekarupa. We visualized Ishvara as having a certain form sitting somewhere. In this case, Ishvara becomes Aneka Rupa, meaning in every form of the world, Ishvara is there. Because Ishvara pervades the world. And then we say there is still a higher level of understanding, which is the third level of understanding. Because Vishwarupa also within space and time. The world needs Ishvara. The world is dependent on Ishvara, but Ishvara is not dependent upon the world. Ishvara can be there even without this world. So when this world was not there, Ishvara was still there. Ishvara transcends this world, transcends space, transcends time. And therefore, that Ishvara is untouched, unaffected by whatever goes on in the world because he is Purna. So we say we have to understand that Ishvara who transcends the world. So in this case, Ishvara becomes Jagad Adhishthanam, becomes the substratum of the world. This is the third level of understanding. He transcends all the forms and has no particular form. So this Ishvara is Arupa Ishvara, one who is formless. And we will talk about this more in our subsequent classes. So the formless Ishvara, Arupa Ishvara. So this is the third level of understanding, the understanding of a Jnani. This we say can be discovered only by understanding that Ishvara and the self are one. This is the Arupa Ishvara. So we saw three levels of understanding of Ishvara. Jagat Karta Ishvara. Such an Ishvara creates the world. Such an Ishvara is Ekarupa, confined to one form somewhere. Then the next level of understanding is Jagat Karanam Ishvara. You say such an Ishvara becomes the world, pervades the world. And such an Ishvara is Anekarupa Ishvara. Is that the third level of Ishvara, the Jagat Adhishthanam Ishvara. Ishvara transcends the world and then appears as this world. Just as the waker transcends the dream and appears as the dream. So such an Ishvara is Arupa Ishvara. We say that one has to gradually, it is impossible to come to Arupa Ishvara directly. One has to gradually go through these different levels of bhakti. Even one has to go through this Artha Bhakti, Arthartha Bhakti, etc. Similarly, one has to go through these different levels of understanding of Ishvara. Basically, to summarize what we discussed today, we talked about 9 forms of bhakti. The first one is bhakti as threefold based on the how one views Ishvara in terms of loving Ishvara. Bhavana Drishti. This is Bhavana Drishti based on how one loves Ishvara. There's love of God as the means. This is the love of the Artha and Artharthi Bhakta. Then there is love of God as the goal. This is the love of the Jignasu Bhakta. And then there is love of God as the self. This is the love of the Jnani Bhakta. This is Manda Bhakti, Madhyama Bhakti, and Uttama Bhakti. This is the threefold classification of love of Bhakti based on love of Ishvara from the drishti of Bhavana Drishtya. Then we discussed Bhakti as a sadhana, Bhakti-Yoga. And we said there is threefold Bhakti-Yoga. There is Bhakti-Yoga in the form of Karma Yoga, the first stage of Bhakti-Yoga. And there is Bhakti-Yoga in the form of Upasana Yoga, which is the second stage of Bhakti-Yoga. And there is Bhakti-Yoga in the form of Jnana Yoga, which is the third stage of Bhakti-Yoga. This is sadhana drishtya, from the point of view of the sadhana one is engaged in. And then we discussed the three forms of bhakti depending upon our understanding of Ishvara. We say that each progressive level is a refinement of the understanding which transforms how one relates to Ishvara. So the first level is Ekarupa Bhakti. The second level is Aneka Rupa Bhakti, Vishwarupa Bhakti. And the third level is Arupa Bhakti of the Jnani. So bhakti can be used in all of these meanings. Therefore, it is not that one is better than the other. There's definitely gradations, but it all depends on what stage of bhakti we are in. At that stage, one kind of bhakti is appropriate. There's no choice in the matter. For a level of understanding, somebody has to engage in Ekarupa Bhakti. One may have to view God as a means. It's all right to do that. We don't condemn anything. We say, choose the one based on where you are. Just as we see a map in an airport, and then there is a thing, arrow saying you are here. I want to go somewhere, but I have to start from where I am. So similarly, one has to adopt the kind of bhakti, the kind of understanding of God that suits one at one particular stage, and then progress from there. But finally, we say we should not get stuck anywhere. We have to progress from where you are. So Artha Bhakti has to progress to Artharthi Bhakti. Artharthi has to progress to Jignasu. The Jignasu Bhakti has to progress to Jnana Bhakti. Only in that is the Purnatvam. Similarly, from Ekarupa, I have to progress to Anekarupa, to Arupa. And how do I do that? From Karma Yoga to Upasana Yoga to Jnana Yoga. And finally, to Jnanam. So with this, I'll conclude our discussion today. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. So yes, Vishwanathanji, you have a
No, yes.
comment?
I
Yes.
always have doubts, sir, so don't
Sure.
mistake me. Okay. Today's topic, the Jnani. I'm going to talk about the Jnani. Since he has got the Eka Bhaktihi or Uttama Bhaktihi, as we discussed, he has attained the oneness, correct?
Yes.
Now, my question, there are two questions. One is, since they are the God or Dvaita principle that is oneness, do they have any Nitya Karma Anushtana applicable to them on daily activities? That is the first question. Because they themselves are the God himself are them. So there is no question of any Nitya Karma Anushtana applicable. This is what my understanding. You can clarify. Second, do they have to do any puja? See, for us to do puja is to love, not to create the love and bhakti towards the God, as we are all in the arthartaha, arthartihi, and then we have to progress towards jigyasu, and then later on becomes jnani to attain the purnatvam. So from that angle, these two questions are, coming to my mind, and then if you can answer, that will be great.
Sure, sure. So first question was Nitya Karmanushtanam, and the second
Correct.
question is about puja.
Yes, puja, correct.
So the answer depends on what ashrama the jnani is in.
Mm-hmm.
It is possible that at a high level, before even we get to the ashrama, we said that the Shastra says the jnani is beyond vidhi and nishedha.
Correct.
So there are no do's and don'ts applicable to the jnani at all. The Shastra says that the do's and don'ts are applicable only to ajnanis, not to a jnani. So all this yajnaha, dhanam, tapaha, etc. that we discussed, all of this vidhi and nisheda, the chodana, lakshanaha, arthaha, dharmaha, the Shastra doesn't bind a jnani with that. The Shastra says you have attained whatever has to be attained, there's nothing more for you to attain, so you don't have any vidhi and nisheda. But then, now we come to the second point, that there is the ashrama dharma.
Okay.
So if a jnani happens to be in grihastha ashrama, he will continue to do the karmas. Not because he has something to gain from it, but because he doesn't want to set a wrong example for other grihasthas.
Okay.
So he'll continue to do that. He has nothing to gain from it. But he becomes a model for others now. And therefore he doesn't want to confuse others. As we said, that the achara of the Shrestha Purusha, we saw that Yadyad Acharati Shrestha Tattadeve Taro Janaha. So the others act according to how the Shrestha people are doing. Therefore, the Jnani doesn't abandon the Nitya Karma, he still continues to do it because he sets an example. Now, if the Jnani is a sannyasi, then how does he become a sannyasi? By giving up the Nitya Karma Anushtana. The sannyasi is no longer bound by the karmas. And therefore, there is no Nitya Karma Anushtana of this kind for a sannyasi. There are some karma associated with the sannyasa dharma. We may discuss some about that later. But then there may also be a jnani who is, for example, a mathadipati. So such a jnani has got these responsibilities for running the matha, etc. As a part of that, the puja and all that are there. Again, that jnani doesn't do it for the sake of something he gains. He does it as loka sangraha.
Correct.
It is loka sangraha. Even the grihastha, you can say that grihastha karma is also doing the karmanushthanam for the sake of loka sangraha only. The only agenda is loka sangraha after this. There's nothing more to attain.
Absolutely, sir. Superb answer, sir. Because I'm relating to the Mutt only. So because they are doing the puja only for the sake of the world, and we should not forget our bhakti towards the Ishvara. Maybe because to incite that example, probably they are doing it. Is what my understanding.
Right.
Thank you. It's a wonderful answer. Thank you so much.
Any other comments or questions? Shall we conclude then?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hari
Thank you.
Om.
Namaskar.
Hari.
Hari Om. Hari
Hari.
Om. Namaskar.
Hari.
Namaskar.
Yes.
Hari Om.
Hari.
Hari Om.
Hari.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Namaste. Hari Om. Hari Om.
Hari.